I did want to pick up on one of the things that Robert's been using thematically since yesterday, because I think it's a really helpful distinction. And it's this idea of via positiva and via negativa. And as I understand those terms, they are two ways to know God more clearly, to know self more clearly. So via positiva, it's not about positivity. It's about actually doing our best to presence and describe that which is at the very core of our being, that which makes up the universe, the essential nature, true self, God. Via negativa is the leaf blower. It's getting rid of everything that isn't God, with the idea that whatever God is cannot be captured in language, cannot be captured directly. And so to me, they've never seemed like an either or. It's always seemed like a both and. The more an example of via negativa that those of you who kind of follow my work have probably heard me share a lot is the line from the Sin Sin Ming where the Zen patriarch says, "Do not seek the truth, simply cease to cherish opinion." That's via negativa. It's going, hey, you don't have to worry about what is. Just see through what isn't. Stop arguing for what isn't. Stop trying to build your life around what isn't. And you will find yourself with a deeper and deeper appreciation for and sense of what is. Via positiva is a contemplation on our nature. It's a deep dive into who we are. It is trying to look directly at the sun, knowing that, like I always loved that, the old scientists, they really did experiment with stuff. Like Isaac Newton went blind for a while because he stared at the sun trying to understand it better. He was willing to risk that. He was willing to risk going blind in order to see. That is the courage that will take us forward on the path, to be willing to look directly at the light, even if we fear it will make us go blind. We go blind so that we can see. We are willing to risk blindness so that we can see more clearly. And so I wanted to, and I suspect this might wind up being a little bit rambling, but I suspect none of you will particularly mind. I wanted to take you on a little journey using how it looks to me as a highlighter, so you can see how it looks to you. And here's, a lot of you have seen my model, I probably have shared it here, of, that we're all diamonds covered in horseshit, coated in nail varnish, nail polish, right? That there is our essential core, and then there's all the shit that we've accumulated, and then there's the pretty appearance we try to put on it all so we'll look cool and spiritual and nice and stuff. I'm going to do a different version of that. So I think, yeah. Can you guys still hear me? This means yes. All right, cool. So at our center, at our core, at human beings' core, this is spirit. This is self with a capital S. This is never born, never dies. It's what is called real because it doesn't come and go. That which comes and goes is considered the illusion, even though some of those illusions can kill you. The form comes and goes. That's why we would say the form is not real, though if we got all conceptual about it, any Zen master worth his salt would smash us across the head with a 2x4 and go, "You sure about that?" But the truth is, when we really sense that this is our true nature and this is a temporary form, yeah, even when we get hit in the head by a 2x4, we're sure about that. Now, there's another layer of self. And this is the psychological. This is the world of not true false, but thought feeling. So the whole place where we are living in the feeling of our thinking is the psychological world. Then, don't order yet. There's the phenomenal world. The world of form. The world of stuff. The outside world. And we societally, culturally, have been taught that if we don't like our experience, change this. Change the outer world and we'll change our experience. Which is a neat idea, but it has a couple of inherent problems. One is part of the outside world is it has time in it. And so often the changes that we want to make in the outside world take time. We're not really in control of the outside world. Don't know if you've noticed that. A lot of things happen that we didn't choose, we didn't consciously create. And so it's a messy world. If that really was the key to having this deeper experience, a better experience for ourselves, or a deeper experience of God, of love, of true nature, it's the wrong place to look. You know, it's the source of the old teaching story that kind of became has become a sort of a modern day teaching parable joke, where the man is on his hands and knees in the street looking for something under the street light, and the neighbor comes out and goes, "What, are you okay, John?" And he goes, yeah, I'm just looking for my keys. And the neighbor comes out to help. And pretty soon the whole neighborhood's like having a block party, pre-COVID, obviously, maybe post-COVID. I don't know, post-COVID. Let's go with that. And this one little kid finally says, "Hey, mister, where did you last see your keys?" And he said, "Oh, over there in the yard." And everyone goes, "Well, why are we looking out here?" And he goes, "Well, the light is much better here." Like, it almost makes sense. It almost makes sense to look where it's easy to see, even though what we're looking for isn't there. But ultimately, it makes no sense at all. So we look away from the outside to the inside. And we go, "Oh, okay, this is in my psychology. So I will study my psychology. I will work on my psychology. And that will be how I will have a better experience of daily life and a deeper experience of God." But the problem with that is it's like the La Brea tar pits in there, right? You get one hoof in, and you use a second hoof to try and pull out the first hoof, and then you lift your third hoof to try and get the first two hooves out. And before you know it, your fossils being looked at in a museum by children. Now, fortunately, in any moment, we can attend to the center. We can go inside. We can look within. We can look to the formless, that which is before psychology, before the phenomenal world, the world of 10,000 things. And when we do, and from that place, we live, we look out into the world, this world starts to settle automatically. It's like a swimming pool. When we're not swimming in it, the water settles. When we stop swimming in our psychology, not because we're ignoring it out here, but because we're going to a place inside us that is before our psychology, that is beyond psychology. Psychology, A, stops leading us around by the nose, but B, over time, it starts to change itself, is the best way I can describe it. So when somebody has a realization and insight, a sight from within, from this deepest part of themselves, the way I normally describe it is nothing changes, but everything's different. But over time, nothing changes, everything's different, and then everything begins to change. Our psychology does evolve, clean itself up more and more. And our relationship with the world changes. And most people find two things happen. One, we start to see the beauty in the weeds and stop thinking that the weeds are an intrusion on the perfection. They're an exception, they're a mistake. And we also see that there are things we can do, and there's nothing in the way of us doing them to create this more the way we like to see it. So the via negativa, the looking at what isn't to get a clearer sense of what is, for me, where I'm at, what I've been seeing, what I am very actively playing with this year in 2021 is what I've been calling, some of you may have seen the morning ramble I did on this, the four horsemen of the mental apocalypse. And it seems to me that the four thought feelings, the four experiences that make it hardest for us to stay here, that make it most that make life seem most difficult, are fear, stress, pressure, and discouragement. A lot of times we're just too damn scared to look because we're afraid we know what we'll see and we won't like it. Stress just busies us. It occupies us. It's like Robert was talking about. We we've scheduled slowing down for later because we're far too busy now, because we've got so much to deal with. And it really feels like we've got so much to deal with because it's all going on up here in the green, in the psychological. It's really busy. I don't have time to deal with the red or the blue. I'm all up in the green. Pressure, because when something presses on you, you can't help but press back. When you're being pushed, when you feel pushed, you push back. You can't make me go to church, Mom. You can't make me do this. Oh, God, not God again. Because we've felt so much pressure around it. Most of us, many of us. But also in smaller ways, the pressure we put on ourselves to be a certain way, to behave a certain way, to reach a certain result in a certain amount of time. And discouragement, because discouragement is the dream killer. Discouragement is why we give up, why we lose hope, why we lose heart, why our efforts become increasingly half-assed and our results follow. And it can become almost like a negative spiral. Now, here's the thing that I've seen new, and seeing new is where we're heading, just so you know. That'll be our via positiva. But what I've seen new is that there is no fear, there is no discouragement, there is no stress, there is no pressure. They're what in NLP we used to call, in transformational grammar, Noam Chomsky's work, were called nominalizations. Processes that are described as though they're things. So there isn't a thing called fear. You can't put it in a wheelbarrow. But you can scare the shit out of yourself anytime you want. There isn't a thing called stress. Can't put that in a wheelbarrow. But man, do we stress ourselves about little things, big things, things we could control, things we have no control over. There's no such thing as pressure, but man, can we press on ourselves and push ourselves and press on ourselves and press on ourselves, hoping if we just squeeze hard enough, the pimple of creativity will burst and the pus of our good ideas will spread out into the world. That's a really gross metaphor, but that's just the one that came, and I'm just talking, so let's move on. And discouragement, maybe discouragement overall. There's no such thing as discouragement. It's a way of talking about the feeling and experience that comes with creating horrific imaginary futures that demonstrate how pointless our efforts are, how futile everything we would even think to attempt is. And just literally kind of sucks the life out of us like a vacuum cleaner from hell. But the really cool thing about that is, first off, if there's no such thing as fear, stress, pressure, or discouragement, I don't have to get rid of them. I don't have to do anything with them. I don't need strategies for coping with them. But if I notice myself scaring myself, I can usually stop. Or at the very least observe and not be so caught up in it. If I notice myself freaking myself up, riling myself up, stressing myself out, I can often stop. And when I can't, I can watch it. I can witness it. I can observe it. And as the observer, I'm not so affected by it. It doesn't take me away. It doesn't draw my attention away from life, away from hope, away from God in the same way. If I can see myself, catch myself, notice myself pressuring myself. And by the way, how do you notice? You feel it. You know you're scaring yourself because you feel scared. You know you're pressuring yourself because you feel pressure. You know you're stressing yourself because you feel stressed. And if I can notice myself doing it, it's usually not that hard to stop. And when I can't stop, I can just witness. I can observe. And it doesn't do to me what it might otherwise do to me. It doesn't distract me as it might otherwise distract me. And when I notice myself discouraging myself, personal specialty, if any of you want tips, we'll do that in a later course. I'm very good at it. But if I notice myself discouraging myself, which I'll probably sense because everything seems pointless and I feel discouraged, I can usually stop. And when I can't, I can continue to notice. And it will change all by itself, because that's the beauty of the psychological world. There is no time in spirit. There is no time in God. Eternal doesn't mean a really long time. It means outside of time. Now is not a moment in time. It is outside of time. Once we get into the psychological, we introduce time. There is an element of past, present, and future. But things can change really quickly in our psychology. We can be up 1 second, down the next, down 1 second, up the next. We're one thought away. And in the world of form, it's like the water of time has turned to ice and things move very slowly. Ice moves. Like, I always thought that was fascinating, that glaciers move. They're not static. Now, they don't move very fast. They make turtles look like Ferraris. But a glacier will move feet in a year, sometimes more. But there's no time here, and there's very quick time here. So if all you were to do was, as best you could, stop stressing yourself, scaring yourself, pressuring yourself, discouraging yourself, you would find more God in your world. You would find more life in your life. You would experience more peace and well-being and quiet and spaciousness and joy. More love, but agape love. More peace, but not like a little moment of calm, the peace that passeth understanding. The rest of peace. I have come to love the line, rest in peace. I just think it's a shame we think we have to wait till the physical form is dead before we do it. We can rest in spirit. We can rest in self. We can rest in this. And in fact, it's where we find ourselves when we're not taking ourselves away from it. So via negativa, not a negative thing, but a clarity about what isn't. We start to see, oh, stress is not before I stress myself. Fear is not until I scare myself. Discouragement is not until I lose heart and discourage myself. Pressure is not until I press myself. Well, what would via positiva look like? Well, it can simply look like looking within. But let me give you one more drawing, one more way to play with it. So if we were to use for our word, and this is the word that I most often use, for this deepest source. In fact, I'm going to use that. So I'll say, let's talk about source, and by source, we might call it God, we might call it mind, but the origin, the source of all life. So we experience that source via consciousness, our awareness. And if our awareness is very narrow, we'll only experience a little of it. And if our awareness is vast, we will experience the vastness of it. The limit is in our bandwidth. It's not in source. But so this is the river of consciousness. Today's episode of Life is brought to you by the River of Consciousness and the rest of our sponsors here on PBS, and then there'll be a list. Well, so what happens is we have this flow from mind, from source of original thought. Fresh thought. New thought. That's the river of insight that we sometimes tap into in meditation or in quiet times or during moments of creativity where there's just fresh ideas coming one after the other. Watched a documentary on Quincy Jones, and they were in the recording studio with him. And one of the things he said that just jumped out at me is he said, when you're working on an album, you got to make sure to leave space for God. So yeah, you got your ideas, you got your poems, you got your music, you got this, but you need to leave space for something else to come through. That's this. But see, then we have these things called brains. And our brains, or our psychology, just another way of talking about it, are filled with memory. And memories twin imagination, which is where you take memories, you take what is already in there and you put it together in different ways and you come up with futures based on the past. Now, the intersection of mind, the big M mind, original thought, the fruits of memory and imagination, which we could call personal thoughts, our thinking. All the thoughts that go through our mind all day long about this, that, and the other, about what happened, about what's going to happen, about what should have happened, about what didn't happen, about that is our experience of life. And then out here somewhere, is that world of form, that phenomenal world, that outer layer. So again, via negativa, we get caught up in trying to change this, our experience, by changing the world of form. Doesn't really work. We try and go into here and change this as if this was the source of our experience. But this only seems to be the source of our experience because there's so much of it that we don't notice this. We don't notice the fresh thought, the flow of fresh thought that's always bubbling up in consciousness. Which is why when we quiet down, when we settle down, we start to get insight. It's just because more of this can get through. When we deepen our understanding, our bandwidth, our consciousness expands. And then it doesn't matter so much that we've got a lot of thinking going on because we can still sense the freshness, the aliveness, the newness, the original thought coming through into our experience and informing it. So if we want to take a via positiva path, we have to look before the brain. And while looking all the way to source is one of those wonderful paradoxical Zen things that kind of can only happen when you're not trying, we can look with relative ease to new thought, to fresh thought. If today looks and feels just like yesterday, well, that's just because we're full of this and we're not seeing past it to this. If it feels like same old, here we go again, another shitty day in paradise, that's just because we've got so much memory and imagination and personal thinking going on that we are oblivious to the new and the fresh. But if we look for the new and the fresh, A, our experience of life is new and fresh, which is pretty cool. But B, there's a chance that we can follow those original thoughts back to their origin. We can follow the milk upstream to the cow. And it's a sacred cow. It really is. Damn, the metaphor factory is on overdrive right now. But anyways, putting that all to one side. So the formula that I just always loved was Sid Banks's formula to understand how our experience is created, how reality is created, is he said, mind plus thought plus consciousness equals reality. Which means that mind plus new thought plus consciousness equals a new reality. That's why we can be so troubled in 1 minute and absolutely gorgeously fine in the next. That's how we can be born again and again and again and again. By going beyond our brains, beyond our repetitive thoughts, to what's new and fresh, to the flow of insight, of fresh thought. And it's almost like if you've ever seen a movie, maybe you've actually been in the desert and seen this, but there's always a shot in movies where you see a sort of a shimmery quality in the air, and then you'll see a car approach. Well, the fresh thinking is the shimmering air that lets us know God's coming. And it's just easier to see that, right? There's just enough form in fresh thought that we can notice it. And it can serve as a pointer home, a pointer back to ourselves, to that deepest part of ourselves, to our spiritual resilience in the sense that that which we are made of, that which we are at core, was never born, never died, can never be broken. In one of my books, I think it was in one of my books, I talked about it as the nonstick frying pan. Right? It doesn't matter what you've cooked in it. It's still good as new. It doesn't matter what experiences you've had. It doesn't matter what memories you've collected and what dark imaginings you've had. That essential self is unscathed, good as new, like it never happened. That's why forgiveness is so powerful. Forgiveness is the practice of clearing the pan and seeing that the pan is as good as new. The pan's fine. It doesn't matter that you burnt the dinner. It just wipes off with forgiveness. And you've got this perfect frying pan ready to cook up the next day, the next experience, the next creation, the next relationship, the next whatever. So we can widen our river, we can deepen our grounding, we can solidify our ground of being by seeing how we take ourselves away from it and doing our best to not do that so much. Or by looking to what's new and fresh, looking directly at the sun, at the light of the world, and seeing what we see. That's the game. That's, as I see it, the game of life, the game of awakening, the game of Godding, the spiritual game, the master game, as it's been called.